Hi, welcome to High Road. My name is Andrew, and in this video I'm going to show you my 10 tips for finding musical ideas for songwriting. If you're a songwriter or you want to be one, you need somewhere to start. You need that small initial idea, a seed that the rest of the song can grow from. But where do you get those ideas? Where do those ideas come from? Well, of course, you could just try and sit down at a piano and force ideas out, but that's not really how creativity works. Usually creative inspiration happens when you least expect it. Musical ideas pop up all the time, all around you. So before I give you my 10 tips on how to actually generate these musical ideas, I need to stress how important it is that you have to be on the lookout for them and make sure that you write them down or record them on your phone straight away, otherwise they're gone forever. Also, just so we're clear, this video is about musical inspiration and musical ideas, not lyrical ideas. If you want to know more about lyrical ideas, check the description below for a video on that topic. Personally though, when I write songs, it's always music first, lyrics second, but some people do it the other way around. Either way is fine. Okay, tip number 1, ideas from experimenting or mucking around. If you play an instrument, chances are that often when you're supposed to be practicing, you end up just mucking around. Now that would normally come under the banner of procrastination, but sometimes that can lead to some really good creative possibilities. Because your mind is wandering and your conscious thoughts are somewhat disengaged, these are ideal conditions for creativity to emerge. For me, these kinds of ideas tend to pop up either at the beginning or the end of guitar lessons when I'm teaching. So when my students come in and they're unpacking, or when they're finished and they're packing up, I'm often chatting back and forth with them and I find myself noodling away quietly on my guitar. And sometimes I'll realize, wait, I just played something that's actually interesting and maybe worth keeping. So I grab my phone and record it really quickly, just in that moment. You may have experienced the same thing if you've been playing guitar while watching TV. Your fingers are moving around idly and ideas tend to pop out that you would not normally have thought of because your mind is elsewhere. Number 2, ideas from improvising. Improvising isn't quite the same as experimenting or mucking around because it tends to be a bit more structured and often has a live performance element to it. The problem is that if you're improvising at a jam session or at a live gig, then you wouldn't have the opportunity to record yourself in the moment. For that reason, it's a good idea to get into the habit of recording all your gigs if possible. That way you can listen back later and find those little moments of inspiration that may have flown by. Live improvisation is actually a really interesting way to develop musical ideas because the adrenaline you experience in the moment can't be replicated any other way. So it stands to reason that any ideas that you may come up with while improvising live couldn't have been generated any other way either. Number 3, ideas from mistakes. These are sometimes called happy accidents. Basically, if you screw something up but it sounds good anyway, then you've actually created a brand new musical idea. Some examples would be finding an interesting chord because your guitar was out of tune when you first picked it up, stumbling upon an interesting riff because you read the tabs incorrectly, or maybe having placed your hand on the instrument in the wrong place altogether. Sometimes this can also happen when you're transcribing music by ear and you go through several tries before you find the right chord or note. Those incorrect tries could actually be considered new musical ideas as well. Number 4, ideas from stealing and then transforming. Now, of course, I'm not talking about copyright infringement. I'm not talking about stealing someone else's song. What I'm talking about is plucking a small element from an existing song or work and then transforming that into something completely new. For example, take 4 chords from a well-known song, put them in a different order, write a new melody over the top, change the tempo, change the key, change anything you want about it, and you've essentially created a new musical work. If you do this right, then the 4 chords that you used for inspiration would bear no resemblance to the original song that you plucked them from. They were just the seed that got you started. Number 5, ideas from interacting with other musicians. Sometimes just being around other musicians can be a source of inspiration. When people come together, they can often create something as a collective that they couldn't have created on their own as individuals. One famous example would be the song Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses. As the story goes, Axl Rose heard Slash playing a warm-up exercise on his guitar and he realized, well, that sounds interesting, that could be the start of something. That warm-up exercise ended up becoming the opening riff of the song. To Slash it was just a warm-up exercise, but to Axl Rose, who had a fresh perspective and fresh ears, it was a creative seed from which the rest of the song was able to grow from. Number 6, ideas from new instruments, sounds or equipment. I think all of us know what it's like to pick up a new instrument and find that it gives us creative inspiration. A guitar pedal or a synth patch can do the same thing. Whether it's the sound or the way it feels in our hands, it can often inspire us to play things that we wouldn't have played on a more familiar instrument. For example, Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones has often said in interviews that he loves to write songs on piano, specifically because he's not a piano player, and because when he does that, he often experiments and finds things that he wouldn't have found on the guitar. Number 7, ideas from unfinished or embarrassing material. Sometimes you'll have a creative idea that is incomplete or embarrassingly bad. I'm talking singing in the shower ideas, tuneless whistling ideas, or just really corny ideas that you would never want anyone else to hear. However, in the back of your mind, you may have an inkling that that idea could become something later on, if you just give it time. So don't throw the idea away just because it's embarrassing right there and then. Record it, save it away for later, for your ears only, and maybe sometime down the track you'll have a light bulb moment with that. It could be 2 years down the track, you're scrolling through your voice memos and you find that recording, and with fresh ears you hear that and you're off. The reason why this happens is because our brains often need time to process and come up with solutions to creative problems. Sometimes we need to change and evolve before we can act on a creative idea. So it's okay to sit on your crappy ideas until they hatch sometime later. Number 8, ideas from everyday sounds. Everything around you makes sound. There are melodic, harmonic, and rhythmic patterns to be found everywhere. From car engines, to fridges, to dryers, to barcode scanners, to the background sounds in restaurants, public places, or shopping centres. You've got to keep your ears open to the musical convergences that could be happening all around you, all the time, right under your nose. And it's amazing what you can do with sounds that you've recorded even just on your phone if you manipulate them later in a computer with software. One famous example is the hi-hat sound from Billie Eilish's song Bad Guy. Apparently when she was in Australia, she heard the sound of an Australian pedestrian crossing and she thought it was an amazing sound, so she recorded it on her phone, and her brother Phineas took that sample, manipulated it in his music software, and was able to use it in that song. Number 9, ideas from squinting with your ears. Okay, this is an unusual one, so bear with me. When we look at an image while squinting, we don't see the image. We see a blurred, distorted version of the image, right? So for example, imagine that you glance very briefly at an image while squinting. Then you take a pencil and you try and draw what you thought you saw. Obviously that drawing is going to be completely different from what the original image actually was. It's actually an entirely new creation. We can apply this same process to sound and music. Often when we're going about our day, we hear little snippets of music in the distance. Maybe it's wafting down a corridor, maybe it's coming out of a shop front, maybe it's coming out of the window of a car going by. All these sounds are blurred and distorted by reflections and objects around us, and we never really quite hear them properly. They're just little snippets that kind of like pass us by. But that effect is exactly what we want, because that's like squinting with our ears. We don't really hear what the original sounds like properly, we hear something different. So if you heard one of these snippets and you tried to recreate what you thought you heard, then you would most likely end up creating something brand new. This often happens to me when I'm in the car and I've got the radio down on the lowest setting and I can just catch little tiny bits and pieces of songs, just enough to spark my imagination and get me started in a different direction. But I wouldn't even recognize what those songs were. They're just little tiny seeds. I know it sounds weird and you've probably never heard of that idea before, but give it a try, it could be worth it. And number 10, ideas that come to you when you're either falling asleep or waking up. If you've ever had a completely bonkers dream, then you know that the mind can get pretty creative when you're asleep. This is basically because our conscious thoughts are out of the way and our mind can just run freely. Now, if we're lucky, we can tap into the creative ideas that we may have in this strange, groggy world if you keep a recording device nearby. Now, the hard part here is being motivated enough to wake yourself up and grab your phone and hit record. I can't tell you the number of times I've told myself in this groggy state that, sure, I'll remember that idea in the morning, and sure enough, in the morning, it's completely gone. A famous example of coming up with songs in a sleep-like state is when Paul McCartney wrote the song Yesterday. The story was that he basically dreamt the entire song, and when he woke up, he could remember the whole thing. I've never been lucky enough to dream an entire song, or at least not lucky enough to remember all of it later anyway, but I have dreamt lots of little ideas that became songs later, and it's certainly a common experience for many songwriters. Well, I hope these tips have been helpful. This is the first video in a series on songwriting. Please check the description below for more topics. As always, if you want to learn how to make music, record music, and build musical stuff, start now by hitting subscribe below, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.